It started like any other ordinary afternoon. The lobby of the Citibank was quiet, filled with the faint sounds of keyboards clicking and the low murmur of conversations between customers and tellers. Sunlight filtered through the glass windows, casting warm patterns on the floor. No one expected anything unusual to happen. But that was before the young man stepped in, nervously clutching a small envelope, his eyes darting toward the customer service desk like he wasn't sure if he belonged there at all. Ethan was only 22. He had been working double shifts at a warehouse just outside town, saving every penny he could. This envelope he held wasn't just paper and ink. It was hope. Months of sacrifice, skipped meals, late nights, and aching muscles. All of it had led to this one visit. His first ever attempt to open a personal savings account. He had a dream. Nothing too big, just something to call his own, to feel like he was finally stepping into adulthood with some stability. But as he walked up to the front desk and quietly explained his purpose, the receptionist gave him a look he would never forget. She didn't smile, didn't welcome him. Instead, she raised one perfectly manicured eyebrow and said she would need to call the branch manager for something like this. Ethan nodded politely and stepped aside, heart thumping, unsure of why such a simple thing needed so much formality. Then came the sound of heels tapping across the marble floor. Every eye turned toward the tall woman in the fitted navy blue suit. She walked with confidence, but her face wore the expression of someone already irritated. Her name was Mrs. Dalton, the branch manager, known for her efficiency, and quietly infamous for her intolerance of wasting time. She looked Ethan up and down as if scanning him for something more than ID. Her voice was clipped and cold when she asked, "You said you want to open an account?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have all the documents and the amount for the minimum deposit." She didn't take the envelope from his hand. Instead, she glanced around the room, then said louder than necessary, "Sir, I don't think this is the kind of bank for you." Quiet hush fell over the lobby. Ethan blinked, unsure of what he'd just heard. I'm not sure what you mean." Mrs. Dalton sighed, then folded her arms. "We're a private bank. We cater to clients with larger financial portfolios. You might want to try a community branch elsewhere." Ethan stood frozen, cheeks burning. People were watching now. An elderly couple nearby exchanged glances. A mother tugged her child a little closer. No one said a word, but the message was clear. He didn't belong here. "I do have the minimum deposit," he said again, quieter this time. "But how do you plan to maintain the account?" she asked, her tone now more mocking than professional. "You realize there's a monthly balance requirement, right? Or did you not check that online?" Ethan swallowed hard. Of course he had checked. He had planned it all down to the last cent. But now, standing here under her gaze, he couldn't find the words. Mrs. Dalton wasn't done. "We get walk-ins all the time who think opening an account is just dropping off cash. But there's more to banking than that. It's about trust, stability, long-term commitment. Not just someone looking for a place to store this week's paycheck." Her words felt like punches. Each one chipped away at whatever confidence Ethan had managed to build over the past few months. The envelope in his hand suddenly felt too small, too insignificant. Someone in the line behind him shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared their throat. A security guard glanced toward the scene, but no one intervened. After all, it was just a manager doing her job. Wasn't it? Ethan's voice cracked as he spoke again. "I've been saving for this. I've worked hard. I just wanted to." "To what?" She cut him off sharply. "Impress someone. Look, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saving you time. There are banks that cater to customers at your level." Her tone was coated with condescension, and the final word hung in the air like a bad smell. Ethan looked down, his jaw tightening. He wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let him. Slowly, he turned and started walking toward the exit, still holding the envelope. His dream, so full of meaning just minutes ago, now felt like something laughable. But just before he reached the door, A voice rose up from behind him. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud, but it was clear, firm. A man stood up from one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in a simple polo and jeans, and holding a cup of bank-branded coffee. He walked over toward Ethan and Mrs. Dalton with calm, measured steps. Mrs. Dalton raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you, sir?" The man ignored her for a second and turned to Ethan. "Son, don't leave." Ethan hesitated, confused. The man looked back at Mrs. Dalton, his expression changing. It was no longer casual. It was now filled with quiet authority. "I don't think you know who you're talking to," the man said softly. Mrs. Dalton scoffed. "Sir, with all due respect." But she was cut off when he pulled a badge from his wallet and placed it slowly on the counter. That's when the entire tone of the room changed. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and gasps rose from a few customers nearby. Ethan leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. Mrs. Dalton's smile faltered for the first time. And just then, the man said 6 words that made every head in the room turn. "Let's talk about your job, manager." And with that, the lobby went silent again, but this time for a very different reason. Mrs. Dalton's face turned a shade paler, her professional smile now stiff and uneasy. She stared at the badge without blinking, the lines around her mouth tightening. For the first time that afternoon, the air shifted, not because of the boy with the envelope, but because of the man who had just revealed a role no one expected. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone was enough to silence even the low chatter in the room. "You know," he said, still looking directly at Mrs. Dalton, "you really should be more careful with how you treat people, especially when you don't know who's watching." Ethan stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure whether to feel scared, relieved, or just overwhelmed. He had no idea who this man was, only that his presence had completely changed the energy in the room. Slowly, he stepped back toward the counter, still clutching his envelope like a lifeline. "Who are you?" Mrs. Dalton asked, her voice brittle. The man gave a polite smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Paul Jensen. I'm a regional compliance officer. I've been conducting unannounced audits for the bank over the past few months. Part of our review process includes observing how branch managers interact with customers." She stiffened. "That wasn't." "I haven't even started," Paul interrupted gently. He turned toward Ethan. "Mind if I see your documents, son?" Ethan blinked, then hesitantly handed him the envelope. Paul opened it and looked through the paperwork: ID, proof of address, employment verification, and the exact amount for the required deposit. His expression didn't change. "Everything's in order," he said, looking back at Mrs. Dalton. "Perfect, actually. Clean documents. Meets the balance requirement. No red flags. Just a hard-working young man trying to take his first step." Mrs. Dalton looked like she wanted to speak again, but Paul lifted his hand to stop her. "We'll talk. But not here." He turned back to Ethan, his expression softer now. "You have a minute. I'd like to walk you through the account process myself, if that's okay with you." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure if he was dreaming. Paul gave a small, reassuring smile. "Good. Come with me." As they stepped into one of the glass offices, customers began whispering to each other. A woman leaned over and whispered to her husband, "Did you hear that? Compliance officer. She's in trouble." Others nodded, casting glances toward Mrs. Dalton, who now stood behind the counter with her arms crossed tightly, clearly rattled. Inside the office, Paul closed the door and gestured for Ethan to sit. He placed the envelope gently on the table and folded his hands. "You handled that well," he said. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't really do anything." "Exactly," Paul said. "You stayed respectful. And that tells me more about your character than any document ever could." There was a pause. Why did you step in?" Ethan asked quietly. Paul leaned back in his chair. "Because I've seen this too many times. young people trying to build something for themselves, pushed away because they don't look the part. That's not how banking is supposed to work. Ethan looked down. She made me feel like I was nothing. You're not, Paul said firmly. And that's exactly what I'm here to fight against. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Is she going to lose her job?" Paul exhaled slowly. "That depends. There's a process. But let's just say, this isn't the first complaint we've had about her. What happened today? It just confirmed a pattern." He paused before adding, "But this story, it's not really about her. It's about you. Why you came here, and what this account means to you." Ethan gave a small shrug. "I've been working for the past year. Warehouse job. Nights mostly. I've been staying with my aunt and sending money to help my mom. She's sick and I just wanted, I don't know, to do something for myself. To feel like I'm getting somewhere." Paul nodded. "That envelope. That was a lot more than a deposit." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was everything." Paul didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled up the bank's internal system on the computer and began entering Ethan's details. "You're opening that account today," he said. "With full benefits. And I'm waiving the first year's monthly maintenance fees." Ethan looked up, stunned. "You can do that?" Paul smiled. "I can. And I am." Outside the office, Mrs. Dalton was still standing by the counter, now visibly agitated as she whispered to one of the senior tellers. Her jaw was tight, her face flushed. Several customers continued watching her closely, many now shifting uncomfortably. Their earlier admiration for her cold professionalism turned into something closer to doubt. Inside, Ethan signed the final documents with trembling fingers. As Paul slid the folder across to him, he looked the young man in the eye. "There's something else you should know," he said. "This branch is changing. What happened here today, it won't happen again." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Paul's voice dropped slightly. "Let's just say, the story doesn't end with an account. There's more happening behind the scenes. More people watching. More changes coming." That sentence hung in the air, strange and heavy. "What kind of changes?" Ethan asked. Paul smiled, but it was a strange, unreadable smile. "You'll see," he said. "For now, just focus on your future. One step at a time." As Ethan left the office, his new account folder clutched tightly in his hand, the other customers looked at him differently. Few nodded. One man even gave him a small thumbs up. Mrs. Dalton, however, turned her back. Ethan stepped out into the bright afternoon light, unsure of what had just happened, only knowing something big had shifted. The day that started with doubt ended with something else. A strange mix of triumph and unease. Because even though he had the account now, he couldn't shake Paul's final words. More people watching. More changes coming. He walked down the steps of the bank slowly, the world outside feeling louder than before. And as he disappeared into the crowd, the doors behind him closed with a soft click, sealing in secrets he didn't even know existed yet. Ethan couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head. Badge. The silence. The way Mrs. Dalton's confidence cracked like thin glass. He had never seen someone with power lose control so quickly. But more than that, he couldn't forget Paul Jensen's words. "There's more happening behind the scenes." That line gnawed at him all night. When he got home, he placed the bank folder on the small kitchen table and sat beside his aunt, who was folding laundry. She gave him a tired smile. "So, you finally did it." He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Account's open." But he didn't tell her about the incident. Not yet. Something told him it wasn't over. And he was right. The next day, Ethan returned to the warehouse. The hum of machines, the clang of metal, and the calls of tired workers were familiar sounds. Comforting in a way. But even here, he found himself distracted. During break, he stepped outside with a cup of cheap coffee and pulled out his phone. He looked up Paul Jensen, half expecting nothing to come up. But there he was, LinkedIn profile, press clippings, even a few articles he'd written about fair banking policies and financial ethics. There was also one short video from a conference. Paul was on stage, speaking about the invisible lines banks draw between people who deserve opportunity and those they dismiss too quickly. Ethan listened to it 3 times. Something didn't sit right. If Paul was auditing that branch, why was he there unannounced in the main lobby like a regular customer? Was it coincidence? Or was someone tipped off? Back at the bank, things were shifting too. Employees were whispering. A young teller named Priya had been there that day and had overheard everything. She hadn't said much during the incident, but afterward, she started watching Mrs. Dalton closely. And what she saw made her uneasy. Mrs. Dalton, once polished and punctual, was now tense and distracted. She spent long hours behind closed doors. She snapped at staff over small things. She even held a private meeting where she warned everyone about outsiders trying to stir up trouble. Priya didn't say anything out loud, but something in her gut told her the bank manager was hiding more than just poor behavior. 2 days later, Paul Jensen returned. This time he came through the side entrance, not the front. He met with the district manager in a glass conference room for nearly 3 hours. Employees came and went, bringing files, printed emails, internal logs. Priya noticed how Mrs. Dalton paced by the copier during that time, chewing her thumbnail, something no one had ever seen her do before. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Ethan. It's Paul." Ethan sat up straight. "Hi, yes. I wasn't expecting. I just wanted to check in," Paul said calmly. "Make sure everything's going all right with your new account." "It is. Thank you again. I really appreciate." Paul cut him off gently. "I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to answer a few questions. About your visit. About what she said to you." Ethan's stomach tightened. Is she in serious trouble?" Paul was quiet for a moment. "Let's just say we're looking deeper. And you might be able to help." Ethan agreed. That weekend, he met Paul at a quiet cafe just a few blocks from the bank. Over coffee, Paul slid a notepad across the table. "I need to ask you to go back. As a regular customer. Withdraw a small amount. Maybe ask a few questions. Nothing too obvious." Ethan's eyes widened. "Like spy?" Paul smiled faintly. "Not spy. Just observe. You see, the kind of discrimination you faced. It usually doesn't happen in writing. Happens in tone. In expressions. In the way people are treated differently, subtly. That's what I need to document. And she's been very careful over the years." Ethan leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. But a part of him, the part that had stood frozen in that lobby while everyone watched, wasn't ready to walk away either. Back at the bank, things were beginning to unravel. Priya overheard a conversation between Mrs. Dalton and someone on the phone. Hidden in the break room, words like audit, compliance, and pulling strings floated through the air. She stayed out of sight but took mental notes. Later that evening, she emailed an anonymous tip to the bank's ethics hotline. The next day, Ethan returned to the bank. This time, he wore the same clothes he had worn that first day. The same envelope in hand, now just holding receipts. As he stepped through the doors, Mrs. Dalton was behind the counter again, her smile thinner than usual. "Back so soon," she said coolly. "Yes, ma'am. Just need to ask about mobile banking options," Ethan replied, his voice steady. Mrs. Dalton barely looked at him. "You can read about that online. Or talk to one of the tellers." Her tone hadn't changed. One of the customers nearby, a woman in a smart business suit, was greeted by name, with a broad smile and a free coffee from the staff. Ethan stepped to the teller line, glancing back to catch Mrs. Dalton speaking quietly to a man in a gray blazer. The same man Ethan had noticed before during his first visit, lurking by the office door. The teller helped Ethan without trouble, but it was clear who the preferred customers were. The ones who dressed the part, talked the part. And it wasn't people like him. As he left the bank again, Paul's car was parked across the street. Ethan nodded once, and Paul made a note in a small black notebook. What neither of them saw was the man in the gray blazer watching them through the window. Later that night, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. Just a few words. Be careful who you trust. They're watching you now. Ethan stared at the screen, a chill crawling up his spine. He looked out the window. A dark car had passed slowly down the street, then turned the corner without stopping. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into. But now he wasn't just part of a complaint. He was part of something much bigger. And someone didn't want him asking questions. The bank was more than just a place for money. It was a place of quiet power, control, and secrets that were starting to leak out. But the real question was, how deep did those secrets go? And who was willing to bury them before they saw the light? Ethan didn't sleep that night. He kept checking the window, half expecting that dark car to return and park outside. But it didn't. The street stayed quiet. Still, the message had done its job. He couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. Every step he took now felt watched, every move calculated. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about Mrs. Dalton being rude to a young customer. It went deeper. Much deeper. The next morning, Paul called again, but this time his voice was more serious. Something's happening, he said. Internal documents from the branch are missing. Files that were supposed to be turned over to compliance. They've just disappeared from the system. Ethan didn't know what to say. Could Mrs. Dalton be hiding them? That's one possibility, Paul replied. Another is that someone higher up doesn't want them seen. Paul paused, then added, we may have stumbled onto something bigger than a toxic manager. At the same time, inside the bank, tension had reached a boiling point. Priya noticed security cameras had been moved slightly, just enough to change their angles. Subtle but noticeable. She whispered about it to another teller, who warned her to stay quiet. They're locking things down, the teller said under her breath. You didn't hear it from me, but a regional executive visited early this morning. No name tag, no ID shown. He went straight into the manager's office. Later, Priya received a strange email from an internal address she didn't recognize. Had no subject line. Just one line of text. Stop digging. This is your only warning. Her fingers trembled as she read it. She forwarded it to Paul anonymously using a burner email she'd made the night after the first incident. She didn't want to be brave. She just didn't want to be silent. Meanwhile, Ethan was at work trying to keep his head down, but it was getting harder to focus. During his lunch break, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number. No name, just a voice message. He hit play. A man's voice. Measured. You've made your point. Now it's time to step back. You don't want to ruin your future over something that has nothing to do with you. Ethan's hands turned cold. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was a direct threat. He called Paul immediately. I got another message, Ethan said, panic creeping into his voice. They're watching me. Paul's voice dropped to a low tone. Ethan, listen to me carefully. Whatever you do, don't go back to the branch for now. And don't talk to anyone from the bank outside of me. Do you understand? Ethan nodded even though Paul couldn't see him. What's going on? I think there's a cover-up in progress, Paul said. Mrs. Dalton wasn't just discriminating. There are patterns of financial manipulation, account redirection, and blocked applications from people in lower-income neighborhoods. It's not just about tone or bad service. It's systemic. Ethan felt his stomach turn. So I was one of many. You were the one who stood out, Paul said. The one who caught it in front of people. They've been careful until now. But your experience exposed the crack. By evening, things escalated again. Paul's access to the bank's regional system was suddenly revoked. No warning. No explanation. His login credentials no longer worked. When he contacted his supervisor, he was told he was being placed on temporary leave pending a review of recent activity. They're trying to silence me, Paul said, calling Ethan again. And that means they're getting desperate. Ethan sat alone in his room, staring at the folder from the bank. His name was printed neatly on the front. Inside were the account papers, perfectly filled out. But now they felt like a trap, like the first move in something much bigger that he never meant to be a part of. That night, he received another anonymous message. But this one was different. It had an attachment. Single photo. It was taken from across the street. Of him. Standing at the bus stop that morning. The caption read, "Careful. You're not invisible." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He looked outside again, but the street was empty. Still he felt exposed. Vulnerable. He called Paul, voice shaking. "They're following me. Got a picture of me from this morning." Paul didn't hesitate. "You need to stay somewhere else tonight. Friend, family, anywhere safe." Ethan packed a bag and left without looking back. He stayed at a friend's apartment on the other side of town, one with no connection to the bank, no pattern that could be tracked. Meanwhile, Priya had made a decision. She printed out the flagged transactions she'd seen over the last few months, accounts that had been quietly closed or delayed after being marked as low priority. Most of the names on the list were from underprivileged neighborhoods, immigrants, single parents, first-time customers. She kept the papers in her locker and called Paul from a payphone near the train station. "I have proof," she whispered. "But I don't know how long I can keep it." "You did the right thing," Paul said. "Don't tell anyone else. Not even your co-workers." The next morning, the bank was unusually quiet. Mrs. Dalton didn't show up. Rumors spread that she had been called to the regional office. But no one knew for sure. Ethan's phone rang one last time that afternoon. It wasn't Paul. It was a blocked number. A woman's voice this time. "You're getting close to something that could cost a lot of people their jobs. Or worse. You've been lucky so far. Stop now or that luck runs out." Ethan didn't respond. He just listened. The line went dead. He stood in the corner of the warehouse break room, heart pounding, mind spinning. He looked down at his phone and realized the battery was at 2%. But his determination, that was fully charged now. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know how deep this went. But he did know one thing. This wasn't just about a humiliated customer anymore. It was about the kind of system that quietly crushed the people it was supposed to serve. And Ethan wasn't going to be quiet anymore. But as the sun dipped behind the skyline, and the city lights began to flicker on, Ethan had no idea that the biggest twist was still waiting just around the corner. Ethan stood frozen, still gripping the phone as the call cut off. The woman's voice echoed in his mind like a warning shot. This wasn't just about being watched anymore. It was personal, calculated. Someone out there knew his schedule, his movements, and now, clearly, his intentions. He couldn't figure out how they were getting so close. He hadn't told anyone except Paul and Priya. And he had been careful, hadn't he? He sat down, heart pounding, trying to piece it all together. That's when it hit him. His account. He hadn't checked it since the day he opened it. Pulling out his phone with a shaking hand, he opened the banking app. For a moment, it hesitated to load, the spinning icon pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Then it opened. Balance, $0. His mouth went dry. He blinked, refreshed the screen, then again. Nothing. The money he had saved for months, the deposit he'd handed over in that envelope, was gone. No record of the deposit. No transaction log. It was as if it never existed. He rushed out of the break room and called Paul. "They wiped my account," Ethan said breathlessly. "My money. It's gone. Like it was never there." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Paul's voice came, tense. "That's impossible. I watched the transaction myself. I made it happen." "Check the records," Ethan said. "Something's wrong. And if they can erase me like that, what else can they do?" That same night, Priya came home to find her front door slightly ajar. Her stomach turned. She reached for her phone but realized it was dead. She hesitated, heart racing, then pushed the door open slowly. Nothing looked stolen. Nothing broken. But her backpack, the one where she'd stashed the printouts, was open. The documents were gone. She backed out of the apartment immediately and went straight to a nearby cafe, plugged in her phone and called Paul. "They were in my house," she whispered. "The files are gone." They knew exactly what to take. Paul's voice was lower than she'd ever heard it. "We underestimated them. They're more organized than I thought. This isn't just a rogue manager. This is coordinated." He didn't say it out loud, but they both knew what it meant. This went beyond Mrs. Dalton. Beyond that branch. Somewhere higher up, someone was orchestrating all of it. And now they were cleaning up the mess. The next morning, Ethan tried to visit another branch of the same bank. He walked up to the counter, showed his ID, and asked for account assistance. The teller smiled, typed something into her screen, then frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no record of an account under your name." Ethan's blood ran cold. "There has to be. It was opened last week. I have the welcome folder. Do you have the account number?" He pulled out the folder and showed it to her. He typed again, shook her head. "This number doesn't exist." Ethan didn't know what to say. He walked out of the bank and called Paul again. "They're erasing me," he said. "Like I never opened anything." Paul didn't respond immediately. "They're scrubbing records," Ethan continued. "The photos, the paperwork. What if that's next? What if they come after the security footage from that day?" Paul sighed. "I already tried to request the CCTV footage from the branch. It's been flagged as inaccessible due to technical errors. I filed a backup request through legal, but they're dragging their feet." Ethan sat down on the curb, staring blankly at the traffic passing by. "They're going to make this all disappear." "Not if we move fast," Paul said. "Listen, I didn't want to involve you this deep, but I don't have a choice anymore." There was a pause. "There's someone else you need to talk to. Former employee. She worked under Mrs. Dalton before you ever showed up. She filed a complaint last year about unethical account handling. But her case was buried." Ethan straightened up. "Where is she now?" Paul's voice dropped. "That's the problem. She vanished 3 months ago. No one's heard from her since." A chill ran through Ethan's spine. Vanished. Like missing. "She left a voicemail with the compliance department the day before she was supposed to testify in an internal review," Paul said. "Said she had proof. That someone inside the bank was funneling funds and scrubbing profiles. After that, nothing. Her number was disconnected. Her apartment was cleared out." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "And no one looked into it." Paul hesitated. "Not officially. But I did. Her name was Sandra Reyes. I think she knew what was happening, and they silenced her before she could prove it." Ethan's mind spun. "You think that could happen to us?" Paul didn't answer directly. "Let's just say we need to be smarter than them now." At the same time, inside the bank's downtown headquarters, a closed-door meeting was taking place. High-ranking executives sat around a glossy table, a large monitor showing a list of flagged incidents, one of which included Ethan's name. Another listed Paul as a compliance risk. A third, just a blank folder labeled PR Containment Strategy. One of the board members leaned forward. "We've cleaned most of the internal mess. But if this reaches the press, it becomes a storm we can't contain." "We have time," another said. "As long as they keep playing small, we keep the upper hand. If they push harder, we push back." Back on the street, Ethan stared at the skyline, anger and fear twisting together inside him. His money was gone. His account erased. He'd been threatened, followed, erased like he was never real. But now, with Sandra's name and disappearance in the mix, the weight of what he'd stumbled into felt heavier than ever. What had started as a humiliating experience at a bank counter was now unraveling into something far more dangerous. Ethan was no longer just a young man trying to open an account. He was a threat to people who had built their power on secrecy, manipulation, and silence. And as night fell, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't back down. But he also knew someone was watching, waiting. And the next move he made could either expose the truth or make him disappear like Sandra. Emily's heart pounded as the pilot stepped out of the cockpit, his expression unreadable. The cabin went still. Even the crying toddler from earlier had gone silent, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Passengers craned their necks, breath held. The woman who had been shamed, the young single mother with tear-streaked cheeks, looked up in confusion. The pilot's eyes locked with hers. "Ma'am," he said firmly but not unkindly. "Would you please come with me?" There was a soft gasp from a few rows back. The mother hesitated, clutching her child tighter. "Did I do something wrong?" Her voice trembled. "No," the pilot replied, his voice steady. "But someone else did. And it's time we fixed it." Murmurs swept through the cabin. Karen, still sitting smugly near the front, shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. The pilot motioned to the flight attendant, who approached and gently offered to carry the baby. The mother rose cautiously, her legs shaky, and followed the pilot toward the front of the plane. As they reached the front row, Karen's face stiffened. "You can't be serious," she snapped. "This woman doesn't belong up here." She made a scene. The pilot turned to her, his tone now sharper. "Ma'am, that's enough. You were heard." Loudly. "Now it's time someone else is." The flight attendant returned the baby to the mother's arms and pointed to the now empty first-class seat next to Karen. "Please take a seat," she said warmly to the mother. Karen's mouth fell open. "Wait, you're putting her here." The pilot looked directly at Karen. "Actually, you'll need to come with me." Karen stood slowly, glaring at the mother like it was somehow her fault. "I paid for this seat. I'm a platinum flyer. And you'll be refunded," the pilot said. "But we don't tolerate hostility, harassment, or public shaming on our flights. You made a fellow passenger feel unsafe. That's not how we fly." The moment Karen was led toward the back of the plane, now red-faced and silent, the entire cabin erupted in a quiet, stunned applause. Few people cheered softly. The single mother, now seated comfortably, tried to hold back tears. But Emily, still watching from a few rows away, noticed something else. The man who had been quiet this whole time, the one who had briefly stared at the child, was now visibly unsettled. He was texting again, but something about the way he glanced toward the cockpit made her uneasy. Then, almost too softly to be heard, she whispered to herself, "What is he hiding?" As if in response, the engines gave a small jolt. Not turbulence, something different. A ripple of uncertainty ran through the air. The baby whimpered. The mother soothed him. The seatbelt signs blinked above their heads. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom. "Folks, just a minor systems check. Nothing to worry about." But Emily knew better. Her instincts, sharpened over years of working in emergency nursing, told her something wasn't right. The pilot's tone had changed. It was too calm, measured, like someone trying not to cause panic. The man near the emergency exit stood up and made his way toward the bathroom, but not before glancing at the overhead compartments with an odd interest. Emily watched every step. And when he didn't come back right away, she quietly unbuckled and rose too. She didn't head straight to the back, though. Instead, she spoke to the flight attendant, keeping her voice low. "Something's off about that man. The one near 23A. He keeps texting and looking around like he's checking something." The attendant looked concerned. "Thank you. We'll have the air marshal take a look." Those words sent a ripple of realization through Emily. Of course. There was always an air marshal on board. But if even they hadn't caught on yet, it meant the threat was subtle and calculated. The pilot returned once again, walking past her to whisper to the attendant. The exchange was brief. The air marshal was now quietly moving through the rows. Suddenly the bathroom door opened. The man stepped out, but his jacket was gone. His hands were damp, his face calm. As he walked back to his seat, His eyes flicked once again to the overhead bins. And just for a moment he made brief eye contact with Emily. And smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was a knowing smile. Like he was aware she had noticed him. Emily returned to her seat, heart racing. Whatever was going on, it wasn't over yet. The tension, the hostility that had started with Karen and the single mother. It had been a distraction. Cover. Something darker was brewing. Something that made Karen's rudeness feel small in comparison. The mother now rocked her child gently, unaware of the larger danger that loomed. The baby, peaceful again, clutched a small cloth animal to his chest. But even he stirred slightly, as if sensing the storm ahead. And then came the announcement that no one expected. "We'll be making an emergency landing due to a technical concern," the pilot's voice said calmly. "Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Gasps spread like wildfire. The plane began a slow descent. Some passengers panicked. Others prayed. But Emily didn't panic. She watched the man in 23A closely, knowing deep in her gut that this landing wasn't about a system failure. It was about him. And just as the ground grew closer and the lights dimmed one final time, he reached up, not for his phone, but for the overhead bin. The cabin slowly began to return to normal, but the air still felt heavy, like everyone was trying to catch up with what had just happened. Emily sat quietly, holding her son close, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck. She could still feel the fast thump of his heart against her chest. Across the aisle, the man who had caused the unease was now calmly talking to the captain near the front of the plane. His badge clearly visible now. He wasn't a threat. He had been watching out for one. The woman who had yelled earlier, the one who shamed Emily for traveling alone with a child, was now quiet too, her face pale. Karen, as others had started calling her, avoided eye contact with everyone. She looked different now. Smaller somehow, like the power she had tried to hold over the situation had vanished the moment the truth came out. The air marshal's voice finally rang through the plane as he returned to his seat. "Everything's secure. We had a possible threat signal from ground control. False alarm. But your cooperation saved time. Thank you." It was said calmly, but every passenger heard the unspoken weight behind his words. As the flight attendant resumed walking down the aisle, offering bottled water with trembling hands, people began whispering to one another. Small pockets of quiet conversation filled the space. Some were about the scare, others about Emily. The woman who'd just moments ago been insulted, judged, and humiliated in front of a full plane was now the center of soft, sympathetic glances. An older woman from the back walked up to Emily, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You were so brave," she said, her voice cracked with emotion. "I raised 4 children. I know it's not easy, especially alone. Don't let anyone make you feel small for that." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes welling up. She hadn't expected kindness here, especially not after the way the flight began. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Karen, still stiff in her seat, looked around and seemed to finally register that the tide had turned. No one was backing her up. A child had cried. A mother had struggled. And she had made it harder. There was no applause, no support, no one to echo her harsh words anymore. The pilot made another announcement. They were 20 minutes from landing. Relief began to wash over the passengers like a slow-moving tide. But just as people started to settle, another moment unfolded. The young man sitting next to Karen, a quiet, shy college student, spoke up for the first time. "I saw something earlier. That's why I was looking around so much," he said, his voice a bit shaky. A man on the ground crew had a different badge, different uniform. He was near the cargo door, but he disappeared before I could point it out. I told the flight attendant. That's when she alerted the marshal. There was a silence that spread again, not fear this time but realization. Everything had happened because someone had seen something small, something that felt off. And while the threat had turned out to be false, the system had worked. Awareness mattered. Judging others didn't. Emily turned to the young man. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "If you hadn't spoken up, it could have been worse. Even if it was nothing." He shrugged, awkward but grateful for the acknowledgement. "I wasn't sure. But something felt wrong." The story had changed again. What started as an embarrassing ordeal for a single mom had turned into a chain of events sparked by a young man's quiet observation. And in the end, no one had been in danger, but many had revealed who they truly were in that moment. When the plane finally touched down, there was no clapping, no cheering. Just quiet reflection as the wheels hit the tarmac. People were tired, not just from the flight but from the emotional weight of the journey. The mother, child, the accusations, the air marshal, twist, and the silent witnesses to it all. As passengers disembarked, many took a moment to smile at Emily or offer a gentle nod. One even helped her retrieve her bag from the overhead bin. The same Karen who had shouted now rushed off the plane, her eyes low, lips pressed tight, trying not to be seen. She wasn't the villain of a movie, just a woman who had let her assumptions turn into cruelty. And now she had to live with that. Outside the terminal, Emily stepped into the warm afternoon light, her son holding her hand. She felt different, not because the world had changed, but because she had faced it head-on and didn't back down. She had cried, yes, and she had felt embarrassed, but she hadn't let it break her. That mattered more than anyone could know. A journalist who had been on the flight, traveling back from an assignment, later posted a thread about the incident. Not to shame anyone, but to highlight the resilience of everyday people. It went viral. "A single mom was shamed on our flight," it began, but by the time we landed, we were all watching her with admiration. Here's what happened. That post sparked conversations online. About how we treat mothers. About assumptions. About kindness in stressful moments. Emily's story became more than a flight incident. It became a mirror for thousands of readers. A reminder to pause before judging. To speak up when it matters. To help instead of harming. Weeks later, Emily got a message from someone she didn't know. It was the young man from the plane. He thanked her again and told her that her strength inspired him to be more vocal about mental health awareness on his campus. "Sometimes," he wrote, "strength isn't loud. It's quiet and it's kind, and it keeps going even when it's exhausted." Emily read the message while sitting beside her son, who was now happily scribbling with crayons. She smiled, eyes soft. The flight was long over, but the impact remained. Not all wounds come from war. Not all heroes wear uniforms. And sometimes a story about a crying child and a tired mother can change hearts more than any headline. She closed her phone, leaned back, and watched her son draw little airplanes across the page. And for the first time in a long time she felt seen.